Welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant, and today we're going to be taking a look at Wolverine's claws. Are they useful? Are they practical? Or are they completely wrong? Well, that's an answer that I hope to have for you by the end of today's episode. Now, these are $20 replicas that I bought offline, made out of plastic. Don't worry, I'm going to be making my own, but I want to get right into today's episode because I already have a lot of thoughts and I just want to get them off my chest right off the bat. Let's get started. So here I'm already noticing that these look a lot like katanas, and what I mean by that is in terms of the cross section of the blade, they are very, very similar to like katanas. The only problem is they're a lot shorter. Next up, they have an inwards curve rather than an outwards curve, which means I don't know how well they are going to be as slashes. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because these look identical to something like a sakabato or a reverse edge katana, which I have personally tested before, and they are not very good. They're kind of so I'm kind of worried that these might not be very practical as, slashing weapons. They should be pretty good at thrusting because have a look at those tips. They are very robust. Which brings up another point is thickness. These things are fucking thick. There is no, right off the bat, this is something that I'm going to change. These are way too thick. If you want something that's light and something that slash well, these need to be way thinner. An important point that I did want to talk about when it comes to something like the Wolverine Claws is power generation and leverage. Now, when it comes to actually striking with these, you're usually going to be striking with your wrist like this. Now, this is not a strong position for my wrist to be in. It's actually weaker at this point. When I strike something hard, usually your wrist can't take that force. However, when I use something like a sword or a knife or anything like that, my wrist is in a different position, which actually gives it more leverage and strength. So when I strike down into something, I'm actually a lot more stronger in the wrist like this. But as soon as it's like this, it's a different story. You're a lot weaker. Do I think that that would play a part in using something like Wolverine Claws? Well, I think it depends how hard you strike with them, to be honest, and what the medium is that you're actually hitting. Now, if I was hitting something like a gambeson or padded armor or something like that, I would want to put as much speed as humanly possible into that slash. However, when it comes to something like hitting a piece of wood, I definitely would not want to hit a piece of wood with my wrists braced like this. So what I'm going to be using for today's project is these here. What do you think I'm going to be using these for? No, I'm not going to be committing a felony. I'm going to be using these for the actual claws. First up, they are a lot thinner, which is far more practical. On top of that, they are good at slashing and they are good at thrusting. So these will make the perfect candidates for actually making a couple of sets of claws. Now, I should mention right off the bat that I'm going to make them like this. I will make them with this sort of inwards curve because I want to test it, see how practical it is. But I also think that I want to try and make what I think are some practical claws. So I'll make one of each so I can test both. Now, what I'm thinking right off the bat for making practical Wolverine claws is actually just this. This blade profile is made for that. Think of it like, well, it's a knife blade profile for starters, it's a falchion, it's a katana, it has this curve, which lends itself really well to slashing and to thrusting. Now, in a perfect world, I would prefer something just a straight blade would be, just as good, but I think this curve for this length of blade will work really well. So I'm going to do one of both, one that will be basically trying to replicate the Wolverine claws and one that is kind of backwards, and then hopefully by the end of today's episode we'll see which one performs better. So something else that has got me very curious is if somebody made a one-to-one of these Wolverine claws here, would they actually be really, really bad at cutting? Now, the reason why I'm curious about this is basically because, well, these are very thick blades, very closely spaced together, meaning would it operate on the same principle as like a bed of nails where they're all trying to push apart the same material and sharing that surface area, making them very bad at cutting? Now, I don't have to worry about that because I'm optimizing my design and making the blades a lot thinner so they're good at slashing, theoretically, but I'm just curious. Something else that I'm going to be adding to the design is knuckle guards. This is such a terrible way. Like, this is not practical to have blades that go in between your knuckles. Like, that's the opposite of what you want. If anything, you want them resting on the knuckles. So what I'm going to do is actually create something like a guard here, I guess, that can disperse all of that energy over the course of the knuckles. So these will be far more useful, because it's something that I've always worried about with Wolverine's claws, is that the blades go in between the knuckles. And just imagine like hitting something with that. Oh, that'd be so painful. So I want to modify that design as well to make that far more useful. I might even incorporate them into some gloves or something like that, just so I can make it a little bit more realistic and a little bit more practical, rather than just having bare steel in between the knuckles, because that sounds terrible to me, and I am not Wolverine. So yeah. So if we look at the blade profile of something just like a standard kitchen knife, it's very sword-like. I know that knives and swords are just basically the same thing, except one's longer and one's shorter. But think of it like a falchion or a katana blade. Like, this is built for slashing and for thrusting. So why wouldn't I want to use this as something like a claw? If I'm going to have 3 of them, if you have 3 coming out like this, that's pretty realistic. That's pretty practical right off the bat. Whereas something like this, it looks really, really cool. The only problem I have with it is this curve, this inwards facing curve, this thickness of these blades, like, and then of course it goes in between the knuckles. So now moving on to the build process for the Wolverine Claws. So this one was rather straightforward, to be honest. I grabbed all the knives that I was going to be using as the claws and put them on the belt sander really quick to take off the edge, because I don't want to be holding a live, very, very sharp blade while I'm trying to grind in profiling and stuff like that. Next up, I moved over to the grind wheel and was just profiling the blade. Something to mention is that this can be quite a slow process, because I have to keep that steel nice and cool. So I'm dunking it in water every, 10 seconds or so to keep that steel nice and cool. After the profiling is done, I will start to put in a bevel. This doesn't take too long because I'm working with relatively thin steel. Putting in a bevel is relatively easy. Next up, I want to remove the handle. These ones, luckily, are just held in by screws, so I popped off the little caps hiding the screw heads. So after the handle's gone, I will start profiling the actual grip, where I will hold it in the hand and in the glove, trying to make it as comfortable as possible. However, because I'm using a pre-established shape for the most part, like it's already something that's been cut out, I can only work with what I've got. So I tried to make it as comfortable as possible, but hopefully with gloves it'll be fine. After that, I throw it onto my other belt sander, which has finer grit belts, so I can refine a lot of the shapes, take off any burrs or sharp edges, and grind in the edge itself. Then I will hit it with a Scotch-Brite pad, because this has a high mirror polish and I want this to be a little bit more satin, a little bit more accurate. Then after that's done, I've finished the other 3 blades. Then I needed to work on the handle components, how I was actually going to assemble the hand. I used some Delrin. This stuff is pretty good, pretty easy to work with, pretty easy to machine, but it's very robust and strong. I'm simply using some 20mm round stock pieces. I'll drill a hole right through the center and then use a bolt to basically assemble the whole handle. Now, after the fact, I actually did add a second hole into the tangs of each blade, simply to give it more structural rigidity so the blades wouldn't move individually. But I did that off camera, I just wanted to mention that. But that pretty much concludes the bulk of the build process for the Wolverine Claws. All that's left is I need to actually sharpen these things. So I'm going to hand sharpen them individually, because I learned, well, very quickly that if I tried to sharpen them while they were assembled, it's terrible. This actually rolls into another point. I wanted to actually make the handle a little bit more contoured, a little bit more, robust. So I was actually going to put epoxy all over the handle and give it a nice molding to my hand. However, I realized that if I wanted to sharpen these blades, the best way to do it is simply to do it individually. And the best way to do that is if I have a handle that can be completely deconstructed, so that each of the blades can be sharpened by themselves. Just a little thing I wanted to add on there, because if people are wondering why I didn't use like a whole bunch of epoxy to completely, secure the hand, make it indestructible or whatever, the reason why is because I actually want it to be able to be taken apart for the simple purpose of when it needs to be sharpened.
I have finished my Wolverine. I have finished the Wolverine Claws,
and they are ready for their testing. So we have the original Wolverine design where the claws face inwards, kind of like a sakabato or reverse edge katana. And then we have just these ones that are basically knives. So we're going to test both of them. So we're going to start the testing phases with thrusting. Now, honestly, I think both of these are going to be effective at thrusting. It's when we get to the slashing later where things might get a little bit different, a little bit dicey. A little bit dicey, if you know what I mean. But let's get started against our, still haven't named him yet. Let me know in the comments whether we should name him Tony, Jarvis, or Ultron. Let me know in the comments and we'll pick a name eventually. But let's get started. Let's see what you're made of, bubs. Something that I should mention before we continue is the actual armor that I have created for the dummy here. And that is about 6 to 7 millimeter thick leather. So this stuff is no joke. So getting through it actually might be a little bit difficult. Now, do remember it's also layered as well. So in some areas, it might be 10, 15 millimeters thick leather. So that's a hard ask, even for something that's very sharp and pointy. But let's go. So I've swapped the original Wolverine design into my left hand, and now I've got the knife design in my right hand. So, because obviously I'm right-handed, one might be a little bit stronger than the other. Honestly, literally none of these are getting through. Now, these aren't like, they're very pointy. They're not like the sharpest thing on planet Earth, but they are pointy knives that are designed to get through this sort of stuff. Now, there are lots of little puncture marks, but I don't feel none of them are definitively going through the armor. So just to quickly test the thrusting capabilities on the unarmored side, because we can't get through the armor, we'll see what we do just to the bare flesh or silicone or whatever you want to call it. I mean, we're getting through, we're making mincemeat. We didn't get through that time. It's just too much force on the end of the tips that it actually just pushes him over, even when he's braced. So if it was flesh, that would go through like butter. Let's get to some slashing. Hopefully this goes better. Okay, went through. Let's do that again. I mean, so there's a couple of caveats here. First up, it's getting through. I'm having to flick that wrist like there is no, I'm hitting very hard right now. So let's see what happens with the actual Wolverine claws. Oh, that one, I felt that one in the hand. I did not like that. Ah, that really gripped on. Ow, fuck. Oh, I'm not gonna lie, that does not feel good in the center of my hand. Like, we're able to puncture, we can puncture, no worries. But when it comes to actually slashing with these, something that I mentioned earlier in the video is I wanted to add knuckle guards because I was worried about it actually going back. Now, what I did was I increased the size of the handle so the palm takes a lot of that force. And now that I'm trying to slash with it, against something like a pool noodle, not even something solid like wood, that I'm feeling that in the palm, and it is very uncomfortable. Something that I can definitely feel is the blades sharing that surface area. When I hit something, I can feel all of the blades simultaneously making contact, which feels like I'm actually getting less force in it. So we've gone through a couple of the tests already. We've gone through a little bit of slashing and a little bit of thrusting, and we're gonna go up to the water bottles in a second. However, I've already got some thoughts and I wanted to mention them. before I forget, that is. So when it comes to these claws, I'm having to put in a lot of energy. I'm having to swing with a lot of force. Not only is it adding to a little bit of soreness in the arm, because usually you want to put in a proportionate amount of force to whatever it is you're cutting. Because I'm having to use such crazy force to slash with these things, it's leading to a little bit of hyperextension in my arm, which I don't like. Not only that, I can feel it in the palm, which I also don't like, and because I'm hitting like I was hitting the pool noodle and it was hurting my wrist. If I was hitting something solid, I don't know about that. Now, when it came to the actual thrusting, it's viable. I mean, for the most part, it's viable. These blades weren't able to get through, but then again, I have got like 15 millimeters of thick leather, so I don't really hold that against these blades, either of them, to be honest. Only one slash. Isn't that interesting? That worked really well. It's thrusting like a beast. I mean, you can do that, no worries. We are finally back in the workshop and it is time to give the verdict on the Wolverine Claws. Right out the gate, they were kind of mid. I know a lot of people are going to be mad, no, Wolverine, blah, blah. They weren't really that functional. They were very cool, very fun when they did work. They were both pretty good, like really good when it came to thrusting, but any sort of slashing, both of them kind of had trouble with it. A couple of my thoughts that I had early in the video, I think, like now that I've done the testing, now that I've done the practical stuff, kind of feel like they were accurate. One of them being like, you know, when I would cut something, they would share that surface area. I felt a lot of times all of that momentum just hitting all at the same time and kind of slapping, right? Something that I didn't expect, which I felt with both of the blades, was when I would thrust into something like the pool noodle that could grab onto the blades, it actually it wanted to pull the blades apart. So it started to get more resistive the further I went in, which was interesting. On top of that, for some reason, I don't know why, this one in particular, the one that's actually like Wolverine's ones, the ones that are based on his ones, this one really hurt the palm, and I'm not really too sure why, because this one didn't. And they have the exact same handle, so I'm not sure what was going on there, but when I would hit with this one, that palm took a lot of that force and it did not feel good. It hurt, basically. With this one, it performed better, I would say, in most regards, but at the same time, like, not by much. They were both, it was kind of like a marginal improvement. So it's one of those things where I think it's just like the concept. Because these blades are so weightless, it's very hard to generate any meaningful force. But when it comes to actually stabbing stuff, they're pretty good. But then when they go up against something like leather, for example, very thick leather, to be fair, they weren't able to get through. So would I say that Wolverine's claws are completely useless? No. Would I say that they have some uses and they're good at some things? Sure. Would they be my first choice if I was to pick like some fantasy weapon? Not at all. So that's pretty much all for today's video. Thanks for watching, guys. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Man, these things are hard. Leave a comment down below. And as always, there will be another video next week. Thanks for watching, guys. In the meantime, there will be a video somewhere here. So you can click on that. Should be a good video. Don't know what it is. Click on it. It'll be a good video. Bye-bye.